Our divisional trade preview series continues with a look at the AL Central. We'll tell you which major leaguers on the Guardians, Tigers, Royals, Twins, and White Sox could be realistic trade targets for the Mariners. Coming up here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Thursday, October 31st, 2024. Happy Halloween, everyone. This is Ty Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today, we'll be looking at all 5 teams in the AL Central for potential trade targets for the Mariners. But before we do that, shout out to our title sponsor today, Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB, that's LOCKEDONMLB, for $20 off your first purchase. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. Sign up now to hear us create our 2025 Mariners off-season plan, which we officially wrapped up as of yesterday. So if you don't want to wait for us to unveil the plan on Locked On M's, I believe sometime next week, sign up. You can check out the spreadsheet that we have. It lays it all out. You can listen to our last episode, which breaks it all down, tells you how it all works. So, yeah. All right. So, as we've done on all of these divisional trade preview episodes, we're going to work in reverse order of the standings in the AL Central, which first brings us to the Chicago White Sox, the worst team in professional baseball this year. And of all time. Yep. And it's a pretty similar conversation, as you would expect, to the one that we had about the Colorado Rockies last week. Though at the very least here with the White Sox, they do have Luis Robert. So that changes things from the Rockies conversation quite a bit. There's also a couple of guys that we've talked about that, you know, we would kick the tires on maybe if they get non-tendered, like Andrew Vaughn, maybe Gavin Sheets, but that's really it here. So I guess we could just copy and paste the discussion that we had on Monday when we were asked about Robert. But any other thoughts on the White Sox? Any more thoughts on Robert?
No, I mean, like Robert, we've talked about him a lot all summer, really. We talked about him. And we did hear that, the White Sox had scouts and they were sitting on Emerson Hancock and they were sitting on a couple other players in AAA for a week at a time. So the Mariners definitely talked to Chicago. They had conversations and they probably progressed pretty far along if, scouts are watching specific players for, weeks at a time. So, we know Jerry circles back. We know he likes to lay the groundwork and come back to complete deals. So I wouldn't say there's a 0% chance. But Robert has a lot of questions. He didn't answer any questions after the trade deadline. He actually played a little bit worse. The strikeouts are really high. The injuries are a concern here. His lack of effort at the end of the year was apparent. He did not care. And so while it's easy to write that off and be like, well, he played on the worst team in baseball history and he's the best player and he's not supported and he just doesn't want to play, like, cool. That's not a great look still, right? Like that doesn't exactly exude what you want in your clubhouse. So yeah, there's a lot of conversation about Robert. The White Sox, if they trade him this winter, they'll be selling low. He still has 3 years of club control left, but the Mariners did at least progress pretty deep in talks for Robert this summer. And I wouldn't be shocked if, they kind of, look around, they're looking for that big bat and they just say, let's take the shot on Robert. We kind of already have the groundwork laid. So it's possible they could do that. And yes, Robert still fits even with Randy Arozarena. So yeah, it's possible, but there's so many red flags and we don't know what their money issue is going to be this year. So possible. Sure. It's worth noting the Mariners also didn't make a trade with the White Sox last summer. So, it doesn't, maybe they just couldn't find anything, but it doesn't seem like they were interested in really anybody but Luis Robert, would kind of be my takeaway there because they went after Vlad and when they couldn't get him, they still made a couple different deals with the Blue Jays. So those weren't wasted talks. And so I do think they're going to be interested in Robert. I do think that they'll re-engage in those conversations. I just don't think that the price that the Mariners are going to be willing to pay is going to be a price that the White Sox are going to be willing to take. So And again, keep in mind, like the White Sox want center field prices for a guy who, for you, is going to be a right fielder or a left fielder. Like that does have to factor in a little bit too. So yeah, it's pretty much Robert. And then maybe if they trade Luis Castillo somewhere, maybe it's Garrett Crochet. And that deal is massive. And maybe it's Crochet and Robert. Like maybe they trade Castillo to, I don't know, the Dodgers, and all of a sudden it's Robert and Crochet to the Mariners. And we're having a lot of fun breaking that trade down, but there's really not a lot here. This is a really bad team. And even like the role players, like you said, they're either, probably getting non-tendered, or they're on like ridiculous contracts, like Andrew Benintendi, which I can't believe that contract has turned into an albatross, but it really has. So yeah, there's just with the White Sox. It's basically Robert. In very specific case, you might include Crochet, but it's basically Luis Robert.
So the Minnesota Twins is a team the Mariners swung a pretty significant deal with last winter for Jorge Polanco, of course. That they're not going to be adding payroll this winter. They're also, ownership is looking to sell. So they're kind of in a weird spot after blowing a great opportunity to make the playoffs this year. A lot of interesting names on this roster, some of whom we've already talked about quite a bit here on this show on CTZ, including, of course, Willie Castro. So yeah, tell me what you see here with the Minnesota Twins.
Yeah, it's Willie Castro is kind of the big one here. He's set to make, I believe, 6.7 is the estimate, give or take. And he's an interesting player. He might be your solution at second base. He might be your solution at third base. He might just be a really good, not really a bench player per se, but like kind of that super utility, like gets 400 plate appearances. The example,
he's basically an everyday player, but he's not playing the same position,
right?
On a day-to-day basis,
right? Like the example we kind of always go back to is Marwin Gonzalez, but that's getting pretty dated at this point. You guys remember Ben Zobrist? That's kind of Willie.
And Castro is a different player than Gonzalez.
Yeah, it's more speed. Yeah. It's more of a speed profile, but that's the idea. And Castro, that makes a lot of sense. For Seattle, they could use a guy like that on their bench, but there's a few more guys. Minnesota, I think, actually lines up pretty well with Seattle, especially if they're going to cut payroll. I think of guys like Griffin Jax out of the bullpen. That could really help the Mariners in the back end. Johan Duran is a guy who is ARB1 this year. He's making money. Do the Twins want to trade him? Maybe, maybe not. But I mean, if you put Duran and Munoz in the back of your bullpen, you've upgraded, to say the least. So that's a couple bullpen guys to watch there. Again, if the Mariners do make a move in the rotation, Pablo Lopez probably getting shopped this winter. And big fan of Pablo Lopez. Bailey Ober and Joe Ryan are both ARB1. I don't know if either of those guys are actual upgrades to what you have right now, which speaks to how incredible the Mariners rotation really is. But yeah, it's mostly guys like that. Kepler, free agent, so he's not in this conversation. I do wonder if Miranda, we talked about this a little bit a few months ago, or a month ago, or maybe a few weeks ago. I don't know. It's all running together. We talked about him a little bit. Third baseman, really hit this year, but struggled a bit in the second half. Not a ton of power, blah, 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 blah. You guys know Miranda by now. Not a good defender. But yeah, I mean, like, unless like Brooks Lee is available, which I don't think he's going to be because he's cheap. I don't think there's a ton here offensively. But I do think Willie Castro is one of them. Maybe Kyle Farmer, if he, I don't know how his option situation is going to work, but Kyle Farmer could be part of your third base solution, perhaps. But yeah, it's Willie Castro. It's maybe Kyle Farmer. And then it's the handful of bullpen guys, and there's a few. It's not just Jackson and Duran. So
I forget. Did you mention Julian?
No, I did not. Julian's interesting. Not a great defender at second base. Strikes out a ton. Has a lot of power from the left side and walks a ton as well. So really interesting player there. Had a great year. Was it 22? I believe. Struggled in 23, and he spent most of this year going back and forth between the minors and the majors. But yeah, Julian is a guy to watch as well.
He
Depending
didn't play
on
in 2022. He had a really good 2023.
20. Okay. So yeah. Depending on how aggressive the Mariners are with money, which, yeah, I know. The Mariners are potentially in the market for a backup catcher. So just to throw their names out there, Christian Vasquez, $10 million, not very good, probably not. But if the Twins want to shop Ryan Jeffers, and Jeffers is backing up Cal and DHing a lot, I mean, that's a pretty good bat. So we'll see. I don't think they want to carry 3 catchers though, but just to make sure we put them out there. There you go. I think this is Castro, Jax, Duran, and then maybe a Miranda, Brooksley, Julian, cheap guy that you can kind of maybe flip a major league piece for, who's not making a ton of money either.
Sure.
And maybe have part of your solution at second or third base. But yeah, there are quite a few players, mostly role players, on this Twins team that the Mariners should have interest in.
All right. So we still have the 3 playoff teams in the AL Central to talk about in just a moment.
Weirdly
But
enough.
first, yeah, crazy, right? But yeah, we'll be talking about those 3 teams in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is once again brought to you by Game Time. So I used to live in New Mexico, and down in New Mexico, there are 0 pro sports teams, and a lot of bands and artists that I listen to skip going there more often than not. So when I moved to Toronto, where there's a baseball team, a basketball team, a hockey team, even a soccer team, and there's great music being played every night in the city, I was right in my element. When I want to catch a ball game or my wife and I want to see a band, I always get my tickets through Game Time. And that was the case well before Game Time sponsored our network and before I even joined the network, because it is truly the best ticketing service out there, hands down. I truly believe that. And now it's getting even better thanks to Game Time Picks. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I can just go on the app, it'll show me the best deal right away, it'll show me the exact view I'll have, and most importantly, it'll tell me exactly what I'm going to pay with Game Time's all-in pricing, so there are no annoying little fees that pop up at the last second. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB, that's LOCKEDONMLB, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. We are breaking down the AL Central, looking for potential Mariners trade targets this winter. Just talked about the Twins and the White Sox. Nothing really to talk about in Chicago, but a lot to talk about in Minnesota. Let's move on to the Detroit Tigers, who were one of the more fun stories of 2024. Unfortunately, us Mariners fans won't remember them very fondly, but baseball fans in general had a lot of fun watching the Tigers this year and the run that they went on. Mm-hmm. We know that the Mariners have liked some of their players that are still on their roster in the past, like Parker Meadows and Kerry Carpenter. Just how do you get those guys, right? Who on this roster stands out to you?
Yeah, it's Kerry Carpenter. That's the big one. He is a pure platoon bat, no question about it. Not great defensively, but whatever, you're running Randy Arozarena out there. Clearly, you don't care that much about outfield defense. And Kerry Carpenter is, more or less Bryce Harper against 65% of the pitchers in baseball. Like, pretty good player. You might want to consider going out and getting that guy. But are the Tigers going to trade him? I don't know, because I'll tell you this, I think the Tigers are going to be pretty aggressive this offseason, but if it doesn't break right for them, they could be in last place. Well, 4th place next year, and be like a fringe 500 team at best. Like, that could be their ceiling. They got incredibly lucky this year. They outplayed their baseball card for like 2 months. The rest of the league really just fell back to them. And they took advantage. Good for them. But this is not a team that's particularly well set up for the next 2-3 years. They outplayed where they should be, but maybe they make some big changes. But yeah, like I do think that now I'm blanking on the name. Kerry Carpenter. I do think Kerry Carpenter is a good ad. I do think he's a worthwhile target to have discussions about. I've heard that Jerry really liked him in the past. That was not this last year. They didn't, or I don't know if they tried or not, but the year before they actually really liked him, and they made inquiries about him. But yeah, I mean, I think aside from him, Parker Meadows obviously had some big moments that kind of screwed the Mariners quite a bit, two separate ones. But then he also, screwed over the Astros in the playoffs. So yeah, you take the good with the bad. But yes, I heard that the Mariners were really interested in Meadows as late as spring training of last year of 2024. So yeah, there's a couple guys there. Matt Vierling is pretty interesting, particularly since you don't have a third base option. He is ARB1. He's not a great player, but he's coming off of a pretty good year that basically took him from that like Nick Senzel range where it's like really good athlete, good tools, can't really put it together, to now Vierling's like, oh, maybe. Like he was probably the third best hitter in that Tigers lineup, which says more about the Tigers lineup than it does Vierling, but whatever. He's definitely got to watch. Yeah, and then there's the bullpen guys, if they're willing to trade one of them. Will Vest is interesting. Foley is pretty interesting. Maybe Brisky, but doesn't really seem like they're going to trade him. And then kind of a veteran. I think we've talked about him at least like 3 acquisition periods in a row at this point, but Andy Ibanez as kind of a, second baseman, really good defender, crushes left-handed pitching, versus righties. Sometimes he's okay. Sometimes he's terrible. So,
I mean, he was literally a 13 WRC plus against righties this yeur. So
yeah. So
unplayable this year against righties.
Right. And you kind of have Dylan Moore already. Does Ibanez make a ton of sense? How many platoons do you want? Blah, blah, blah. But that's a guy who I think I'm pretty interested in. And then, if you want to take a shot on like a former top prospect who hasn't really panned out, there's a couple of them here. There's Casey Mize, and then there's Spencer Torkelson, who Torkelson, terrible this year. Last year at 31 home runs. So, I mean, yeah.
I mean, Torkelson was essentially Jake Berger in 2023.
Yeah. So I do think that there are some guys here. There are some pieces here. I don't think you're going to find like major assets off of this roster. I mean, if you could get Riley Green, by all means, without giving up Miller or Wu or Kirby or Gilbert, by all means, go get Riley Green. But you can't. So I think it's Carpenter. I think it's Vierling, maybe a bullpen guy or two. And then I think it's like the former top prospects, Casey Mize and Spencer Torkelson. Both of those guys could make quite a bit of sense.
So the Kansas City Royals, Colby, what do you think about them?
Bobby Witt Jr.
Clearly.
Logan Gilbert for Bobby Witt Jr. I'm willing to make that sacrifice.
There are quite a few like role players that, maybe you can kick the tires on that are kind of interesting. I think the guy that would stand out the most here for people because of the need at third base for the Mariners is Maikel Garcia, but
he was not good this year.
Yeah, he wasn't good, and I'm just in general just not a huge fan.
He's a glove only third baseman, like no power whatsoever.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, like MJ Melendez, Kyle Isbell, maybe.
Yeah, Melendez can't play defense. Isbell kind of can't hit. So
he can play defense but can't hit. Melendez can't play defense and most of the time can't hit.
He's got some really insane pull power, but it's just part-timers, really. Not that doesn't have value. Of course it does.
Yeah.
But nothing to get super excited about.
But like the Mariners, they're not getting Pasquantino. They're obviously not getting Bobby Witt Jr.
Probably not. I mean, if you just want to give up on it so quickly, probably not. But
sure.
I mean, I'm just saying there's a path out there for Bobby Witt and Vlad Jr. And if you like that path, check out our offseason plan. # totally not lying. But it's
sure.
it's like a couple guys in the bullpen. Hunter Harvey who they acquired. They were pretty disappointed with him. They might be willing to move on from him, and pretty good track record there overall. John Schreiber is pretty interesting. Carlos Hernandez, who you remember Julio hit that nuke 2 years ago to kind of kick off the August of Julio, so to speak. He's got pretty good stuff. He's ARB eligible. He's kind of struggled a little bit, so he's out there. And like you said, Isbell, Melendez, a couple role players, fourth outfield types. Melendez does have a catching background, but there's a reason he doesn't do it anymore. Again, if
he
you're
would
looking
be
for
your emergency third catcher.
Yeah. Again, if you're looking for a backup catcher, Freddie Fermin is pretty interesting. However, he's kind of he's also kind of transitioning to the full-time catcher because Salvador Perez literally shouldn't catch. He's not good back there anymore. But yeah, like you said, you're not getting Pasquantino. You're not getting Michael Garcia. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Michael Massey is a guy to maybe watch. I think there's a little bit more in that bat, but Kansas City, like you're not getting like Seth Lugo. You're not getting, there's no real starting pitcher that you're going to target here. And that's not to take a shot at Kansas City's rotation, which was pretty darn good. Just that the Mariners rotation is set. So again, like with all starting pitchers, unless you trade one of your guys, trading for another one doesn't make a lot of sense for you. So I think we're looking at bullpen arms. We're looking at role players. And then maybe you take a shot on like you have the fix for Melendez or you have the fix for Massey or somebody like that. And you take that shot. But yeah, I think it's like Hunter Harvey. And then like Melendez and Isbell. Yeah. Guys like that. Like they're not a great fit between these two sides. We know that the Royals were very interested in the Mariners pitching last year, specifically Miller and Wu. And it's like, okay, but you don't really have the pieces to go get those guys because Pasquantino is not going to carry that package for you. So there's not a great fit here. It's bullpen and role players again. And the Royals, obviously they're going to go into next year thinking they can win the division. So they're not just going to give away, valuable role players. You're going to have to give up, pretty good hauls to get them.
You're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. We are breaking down the AL Central, looking for potential trade targets for the Mariners. And lastly, here for us, Cleveland Guardians. How are the Mariners getting Jose Ramirez, Colby?
Yeah, it's going to be tricky, but I think they could pull it off. Jose Ramirez, like in all seriousness, like, look, are the Guardians going to move Ramirez? Of course not. Of course not. Of course not. Maybe. Like they might. The Guardians, they're never going to spend. Like, accept it. They're not going to spend what they should. And Ramirez takes up a big chunk of their payroll. He's also getting another year older. He was great this year. So, like, I'm not saying that they're going to do it this winter, but Cleveland is one of those teams where when you look at it and you go, oh, well, they wouldn't trade their star. Cleveland's one of those few teams where you're like, you sure about that? They might. Like, whereas like Vlad Jr. is like a 5% chance. I think that like Jose Ramirez on any given offseason is like a 10 to 15% chance. And that's just steady, right? But I don't think you ever get to a point where it's like they're absolutely going to trade him. Because his contract is very reasonable. It's eating up most of their payroll. And, they have some guys who are going to start to make a little bit more money over the next couple of years. So Ramirez, not likely to be traded. I would say I would be shocked if he was traded this winter, but you can't rule it out entirely. Like the Rays, the Guardians are willing to trade guys a year too early or whatever to kind of reset their payroll situation. But yeah, like we say it in jest, how do they get Jose Ramirez? They probably don't, but I wouldn't say that there is a 0% chance that Ramirez is available this winter. Right. So just keep that in mind. But other than that, there are a couple guys. The biggest and most obvious one is Josh Naylor, who has just 1 year left of club control. Clearly, they're not signing him to an extension. They've acquired Kyle Manzardo. He's going to take over the first base duties probably this year. Naylor's set to earn about $12 million in arbitration. Josh Naylor's getting traded this winter.
They also have another guy in John Kinsey Noel who can play some first base.
First base DH. So Yeah, both of those, Manzardo and Noel, are making the league minimum. So those two guys can take Naylor's spot for $11 million less, which for Cleveland matters. So Naylor's getting traded. Got off to a really fast start this year, really slowed down towards the end, but it's, 25, 30 home run power. He actually has a history of hitting for a high average. This year, he kind of flipped his profile a little bit. Used to kind of be questions about whether or not he could, hit for power and average, or if he was just going to be an average, guy who has kind of below average first base power. But yes, he is a first baseman. Probably should DH. Like, he's not a good glove. He is very slow on the bases. And he is not a huge walker. He'll walk some. It's not like he doesn't walk at all. He's not Victor Robles. But he is not exactly, like Randy Arozarena, at least this last year, Randy Arozarena. But yeah, 243, 324, 56. Last year, it was 308, 354, 489. But this year, he hit 31 home runs. In 2023, he hit 17. So it is kind of a, a little bit of a sellout for power a little bit more, because you're a first baseman type of profile. I don't know if you'd rather have the 31 home runs or you'd rather have the 350 on base, because he actually slugged more in 2023 than he did in 2024, just fewer home runs. So obviously more strikeouts this last year too. So everything in the profile points to a guy selling out for power, getting close to free agency, wanting to cash in as a first base DH only. I have to hit home runs to make money, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, I think if you're going to acquire him, you might look at extending him, at least, maybe it's only a 3 or 4 year extension, but possibly I'd probably rather have the guy hitting 308 with a 350 on base and 40 doubles and 20 home runs than the guy hitting, 30 home runs and hitting 240 with a 320 on base. But he makes sense for the Mariners. Again, he's a left-handed bat, doesn't bring anything to the table other than offense. The power will play at T-Mobile Park. It's great pull power. I watched the dude break a window at the Hit It Here Cafe at batting practice a few years ago. Like, tremendous power, very easy power, but there's also some hit tool there, and the ability to put the ball in play pretty consistently. So he's only a 1.5 win player this year because of the defense and the base running, and because of the kind of fringe, slightly above average on base skills that he showed this year. But Naylor's the guy out of everybody on this list. He is the guy most likely to be traded, and the one who also kind of makes the most sense for Seattle. But there's a few other guys on this Cleveland roster.
The one guy that I want to talk about, or at least acknowledge, I don't think he's going to get traded, but I at least want to acknowledge him, is David Fry. Now, all hopes of him getting traded probably died when he hit that home run, as silly as that sounds, but that's probably the case. And also, he's pre-arb who can play a lot of different positions. Yeah. Right. So, but he had a kind of a 2023 Luke Raley season where it was a tale of two halves for him. In the second half, since July 1st, he slashed 211, 279, 366, 84 WRC plus. He was awesome in the first half. Amazing in the first half. But again, like Luke Raley, kind of fell off in the second half. So it's like, who is David Fry, really? What kind of player is he? But he's a guy that can play a lot of different positions. He can also catch a little bit. So maybe there's a path there, but probably not. Again, now he's kind of a cult hero. Again, he's not making any money. He can play a bunch of different positions. He gives the Guardians a lot of flexibility. So yeah, probably not, but I did want to mention him.
Sure. They acquired him. He also hit some big home runs in the postseason, but Lane Thomas going to make $8 million. Again, the Guardians, that means something. Like, that's a big chunk of their payroll that they're willing to spend, unfortunately. And I would hope payroll goes up this winter. Because, they just went to the ALCS, but you never really know with them. But Lane Thomas, kind of a fourth outfielder, plays into the DH mix a little bit. He's set to make $8 million, so he could be on the move this winter. You want to take a shot on fixing Karen Shack? You want to take a shot on that? Like, most annoying pitcher to watch in baseball, but yeah, it was pretty good in 2023. But yeah, obviously struggled this year. Then there's guys like Nick Sandlin and Eli Morgan, mostly middle relief types, but they, Cleveland's bullpen was really good this year. You need middle relief types. You need, guys who could pitch. Like, bullpen is probably the most underrated need for the Mariners this year. Nobody seems to be talking about it, but the Mariners need bullpen arms, like good ones. And so Cleveland has a couple. So that could be something there. Dark horse here to get traded. Andres Jimenez, the contract, he goes from making $5 million this last year to $10 million in 2025, and then that jumps to $15 million in 2026, and then it jumps to like $23 million for the last 2 years of his deal. He was not good this year at the plate. He was not very good last year at the plate. 2022, he was great at the plate, and he's arguably the best defensive player in baseball, regardless of position. And he happens to play second base, which is a high, value position, which the Mariners currently do not have any answers at. Major league answers at that are as good as Jimenez, even with the bat issues. So, could the Mariners acquire him? We know that the Guardians are not going to pay Andres Jimenez $23 million in a couple years. Not going to happen. He's going to get moved in the next year or two. Could be this winter. Do you want to take a shot on that? Do you want to be the one to try and fix the bat? Because for him to be like a 4-win player, 5-win player even, he just has to be average. Like, he just has to be a 100 WRC plus. He's only 26. Like, it's not like he's going to lose his, basically, the idea is Nico Horner, but there's even less pressure on the bat because he's significantly better than Horner even at second base. So the only concern there is that he's owed a lot of money on the back end of his deal. And I don't think the Mariners are going to be a team that's going to pay, an average hitting second baseman $23 million. So you probably need Cleveland to eat money. That's probably not going to happen. So probably dies. But again, if you're looking for kind of a dark horse name here that could be traded and could, fill a need in the infield for the Mariners that really isn't getting talked about anywhere else, just keep it in the back of your mind. Andres Jimenez, maybe.
Sure. All right. So I think that's it. All right. Anyone else you want to quickly mention?
No, I mean, I don't know. The whole thing with the starting pitching remains the same, but if you trade one, Tristan McKenzie, maybe. But sure. Yeah, again, bullpen arm. And then there's actually a few everyday player types in Cleveland. It's the Naylor, maybe Jimenez, maybe Fry, maybe Jose Ramirez, probably not this winter, but maybe. You cannot rule it out. Not with Cleveland holding his contract. So it's always worth checking in. That first call every winter. Hey, you interested? No? Okay, I'll call you in 12 months.
Sure.
Or I'll call you in 6 months at the deadline. Let me know. But yeah, the Cleveland, there's a few. There's actually a handful of guys that make a lot of sense for Seattle.
All right, well, that's going to do it for our show. Before we get out of here, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Titan Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at @LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Titan Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.